So, first off, this is actually a celebration. Um, oh, sorry. This is actually sort of a celebration of CV. It's been it's been a long journey. So I hope that during this presentation, I can discuss a bit of that journey and just sort of show where we've gone and how we got to the point that we're at today. So it's a bit of history. But in 1999, there was no mechanisms for identifying vulnerabilities. This caused a lot of grief for certain classes of security products at the time, especially intrusion detection products. At the time, I was working at an intrusion detection company. And one of the issues that we were causing was that all of the products were affecting P-certs, and it was very costly to do any sort of intrusion detection. When one tool went off, quite often another tool would also go off, and the two different teams would have to be formed to actually go off and evaluate whether or not this was, in fact, the same vulnerability. CVE addressed that. It does today because it allows us to communicate. It was extremely labor intensive for us, and we had no mechanisms. So when Steve Christie and Dave Mann came up with their paper around towards a common enumeration of vulnerabilities, it was well received, and there wasn't anyone that I can remember at the time that didn't think it was a good idea. It was just one of those things that we had to sort of figure out how we were going to use it. So after I read the paper, I was working at a company called NFR. We initially put the existing CVE IDs, which I think there were only two or three at the time, into our alert messages, our logs, so that people could see that this was the same. I actually coordinated with ISS and they with me, and we did that so that we were going to respond the right way. The problem was that this was, initially a very U.S.-centric, vendor-focused in program. If you weren't a vendor, open source really wasn't as big a deal then as it is today. But it was a weird sort of way in which we actually, as CV editorial board members, had to test the vulnerabilities ourselves in-house, and then we voted on them. That doesn't scale very well. At the time, Stephen Northcutt tried to sort of push the board in the right direction and said, when we reach 1,000 entries, it'll be a very powerful tool. Later on that year, we actually did, but we didn't. We had two classifications back then: candidates and CVEs. And during that first year, we accomplished a grand total of 321 CVEs. So from the beginning, MITRE until 2016, MITRE ran the CVE program. The editorial board was there for review, advice, extreme discussions. We had quite a few different sets of opinions. For those who remember those days, we were very active from the standpoint of the conversations. The mailing list was where most of the work was being incurred, and it was a very active mailing list at times. But through the years, the CV program struggled with resources, which is not unheard of, considering we found that a lot more software, as has been said, software is eating the world, and that software has vulnerabilities. So from those vulnerabilities, we found ourselves in a situation where we were getting a lot more pressure on the CNALR to actually address the situation. Be able to make sure that we didn't have the kind of backlog that was really affecting the entire community. So in 2016, we finally realized that we had to do something. There was definitely something that had to be corrected, and the editorial board was renamed the CVE board, and the board became responsible for the program as a whole: strategic direction, governance, operational structure, and the like, as well as the rules. And the board initiated the strategic planning working group to try to address some of these issues. The SPWG immediately focused the first 6 or 8 months of its existence on federating the program and trying to figure out how we could change a hub and spoke model into a federated model. This required a great deal of different types of changes to the program, not just the policies or the rules. The rules we didn't really have rules at that point in time, as you would think we have the structured rules today. So, establishing a set of rules, trying to build and design the automation that needed to be there, putting the changes to the board's governance aspects. There was a lot of things that had to occur in a reasonably short period of time. One of the things was we had to change the model from the CNALR writing all the descriptions to actually the CNAs themselves having much more control over what was in the records. Instead of MITRE doing all of the record creation and management and support, this was something that we were now hoping that the CNAs, especially some of the ones that are on the call, would do. As it turned out, they were quite happy to do. There was a great deal of outreach that had to occur. So fast forward from 2016 until now, we have put a federated environment in place. The CVE board really governs the guidance and strategic direction for the program. We have created working groups to allow us to really address certain areas that the program needs to address, but doesn't have the resources to do purely by themselves. They need to work with the community itself, and this has been a real positive for us. But we have been able to expand the program greatly with 412 CNAs compared to, I think, 23 or 24 that existed in 2016. So the program has got itself into a federated model, and very successfully, and we are looking to expand that model going forward. Part of our ability to evolve, and one of the things that is important to note, is the program has been evolving from day one. And we'll go through a couple of those, but the reality is that evolution has come because of the voices that have participated in the working group. The working groups have been formed through the period from 2016 until this year. We actually formed the AI working group. But these working groups are very, very beneficial. And if you're a CNA, you can participate in any of the working groups. If you're not a CNA, and you're just you're a user, so to speak, of the program, there are a few working groups that are limited through the possibility that you can join. Things like strategic planning working group have a lot of pre-decisional kind of discussions that really aren't ready for prime time. They're half baked half the time, but what comes out and then is approved by the board is something that will absolutely make transparent to the world. But the automation working group, I think even the quality working group, some of these working groups are purely open to the public, anyone who wants to participate. And that's actually helped us along the way. But it's helped us in trying to get some of the CNAs involved in the program, trying to get them to help us make it better for you. So with our outreach towards the CNAs and really trying to grow the program, I like this slide because it really shows that the Federation made a difference. And it made a pretty drastic difference rather quickly. So we've actually seen the percentage of vulnerabilities issued by the CNALR, by the legacy kind of assignment mechanisms drop quite a bit from 100% to 16%. And we're seeing the CNAs who are the rightful organizations to be able to be assigning these vulnerabilities step up and do so. So for that purpose, thank you. As I said, we've evolved through a few areas. One of the evolution has been the CVE data format. Initially, the CVE data format was 3 pieces of text for all intent and purposes. It was a description of the vulnerability, the URL to that vulnerability, and the assigned CVE ID, which has worked rather nicely for the most part during the early years. But we found that, and this really goes back to the very beginning, we found that having a syntax that allowed only literally 10,000 CVE IDs to be assigned, ODs, IDs, to be assigned was limiting. And we never thought that would be the case. We thought if we ever get to 10,000, this was in a single year, this is a real milestone, a real success. Well, in 2000, I think it was 10, we started to see vulnerability databases for vendors going past 10,000. And so we started to have some small conversations at first, but in 2012 became a sort of a firestorm of conversations as to how to expand the CVE ID syntax that would allow us to sort of scale the program in a lot of different ways. In 2014, what you see on the left side is something that was sent out to a lot of vendors that tried to show that the final change was coming, and they better be ready on January 1st, 2014. Their tools could run into problems. And in fact, we did run into a few, but very, very few. And surprisingly, the outreach was useful and helpful. But this allowed us a lot more flexibility in CVE ID assignments as a whole. We used to do block assignments. Then now with some of the automation that we put in place to be able to reserve the CVE ID, you don't need to do that anymore. That allows us to do it on demand, so you can get a CVE ID when you need it, and not have to try to do the block management and the ID management that you used to have to do at the beginning of every year as a CNA. So that's actually a positive out of some of the automation that we've had, is reducing the amount of efforts that have to be tracked internally. But as a part of this, we in 2018 talked about doing a GitHub pilot, when that pilot really sort of drove the JSON 4 version, and as an intent to capture as much information as we could. When a CVE is assigned, it's usually assigned at a time when, hopefully, when the vendors or the software publishers are putting out their advisory on the issue. So there's a lot of information right there, right then available. We wanted to start capturing as much of that information as possible, as near to the time when that vulnerability was being identified. Reason being is that with more information, you had a better chance as a defender, downstream defenders, to understand, be able to see what it is that they needed to deal with, and how to prioritize it from the standpoint of their defensive mechanisms. So in 2002, JSON 5, a step up, allowed for real structured data, and it was targeted towards automation. It was targeted towards integration with processes internally as well as within the vendors, so that if you wanted to, and you can today, and I think there's at least a couple who are trying to build this into their actual advisory processes, so that when they publish an advisory, they also update the CVE record. This is a real step in the right direction because it takes a lot of the human factors out from a PSERT perspective to manage that, and just becomes a part of how you do business when you're notifying customers of vulnerability. So CVE at 25 has grown from very small group of folks who were just trying to solve a problem for one community. And now we have found ourselves as really the cornerstone of vulnerability management. That's a serious benefit of CVE. That's an amazing outcome from our perspective over the years. For those who were there at the beginning, these were dreams, but today CVE records are used in a lot of different areas, from national databases and security advisories, from tool vendors, incident response teams, and a lot of research, as well as policymakers. So this is something that we've worked hard for, and we've had a lot of help along the way. Thank you to all the CNAs, because honestly, you're the backbone that's making this successful, even more successful moving forward. But our intent really is to assure that we're being valuable to the downstream vulnerability management community. That is our focus. That is why we do what we do. We want to make sure that we can better protect the defenders as they try to move forward in addressing the vulnerabilities that are there. So what you've seen in CVE is that we are starting to work to enrich our data, to get additional information directly into the CVEs themselves, so that we have, in fact, the ability to do what I just said, and make it more informational, make it more valuable to those who have the responsibility of defending. Having new ways of doing scoring is a real positive. When combined, a lot of times this allows for potentially better sets of tools to be developed that will allow us to better determine when and how mitigation or remediation needs to occur in the internal organizational networks. It allows us to know if, at least because of KEV, because of the CISA KEV known exploited vulnerability catalog, that something has been seen in the wild, something is available that could be attacked. If you're looking at really prioritizing and you're on the fence, if it's in the KEV, don't be on the fence. It should be the first place you go. Are these the vulnerabilities that we need to have covered? And a lot of what we're trying to do with things like CWE is to try to categorize these in a mechanism that really makes it useful moving forward from the standpoint of helping to try to understand the type of vulnerabilities that we're dealing with, as well as how to eliminate entire classes potentially. So we're looking to have data that is actually going to enhance the ability to make the vendors have a different perspective on how this data can be brought together, so that if open source or software publishers want to build tools, they can build tools that are more effective, have better information, and make it easier for defenders to actually do their job. And second, to try to pull together that type of information from a lot of different sources and bring it into a feed that makes it easier to digest, easier to use, and more effective for the community as a whole. So one thing to note, getting to the last slide, and I want to, second to last slide. I want to note that year over year, we're tracking metrics. This is something we've started in 2017-18 timeframe, trying to track metrics to see where we were really growing. And this is because, in a lot of cases, because of the CNAs that have decided to participate and buy into the program as a whole. That's a real plus for everyone. So when you add more additional information to your published CVE record, you are definitely benefiting all of those folks that consume that downstream, and that is quite a community. And as a sort of final slide, I want to say thank you first off to Steve Christicoli and Dave Mann for their vision and the initiative in launching a CVE program. It has turned into a truly operational program, and that's a positive. We wouldn't be here without the success of hundreds of organizations in adopting CVE and using CVE for their own internal benefits. And we are truly looking forward to the collaboration with our community partners moving forward as we go into the next 25 years. And with that, I will turn it back over or open it up for questions. If there's no time, there is no time. I'm past my time.
We are a little over time though, Ken. This was great. Yeah. So if there are questions, I did put some links earlier in the chat or when Ken was talking to these documents, at least the report and the press release. If you have questions for Kent, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and he can monitor that for comments, as can others.